Alright, welcome back everyone. Today we're going to be talking about value, which is essentially thinking about the quality of light. And as we go today, we're going to be considering some very specific learning goals. So number one is we need to know the definitions of key terms that are associated with lighting an object. And this is going to allow us to be able to accurately describe the quality of light that we're going to see in the images that we're looking at. Number two, if you were to apply these key lighting concepts, what would that do in terms of illuminating an egg, similar to what you had seen in the previous slide? And lastly is to be attentive to where the light source is and how it affects the overall lighting of the object it is that you are drawing. So let's dive in, and first thing is let's take a look at how we are going to light the object. So the first thing that we need to remember is that we need to have a lighting source, and I've indicated that here with this reddish light coming in on top of the egg. And where the position of the light is, opposite of that, you are going to get your cast shadow. All right, so they're on opposite sides from each other. All right, so the light hits the egg, it creates a light spot, and then the very, very lightest part, the lightest value, we refer to as the highlight. Okay? As we start moving down towards the cast shadow, right, we have a range of midtones, which are middle values of gray, so to speak. And we have a core shadow, which is kind of like the darkest shadow that is on the object itself. And then we have a minor shadow. And then we have underneath, this is what really makes things three-dimensional when we're drawing them, is that we need to understand that there is going to be some light that reflects off the surface that the object is sitting on, back up onto the object, and it actually lightens up a little bit down at the very edge where the objects touch. Okay? So when we're thinking about value, I want you to think about a value scale, and that means that there is a range of different whites, grays, and black, right? And they vary. So we go from white down at the very bottom to black up at the very top, right? And as we go in between, we get a scale, right? So they gradually get darker and darker and darker up towards the top. And we can also look at how we can use different drawing techniques, right? So here's kind of just a general fill. We've got some scribbles, some dots, hatching and cross-hatching, back and forth. And it's how we control the application of different media that allows us to create a sense of value with just a single color, right? So this is all just pencil, but by getting the lines closer together in some areas and farther apart in others, we are able to create the difference between a dark, right, where the marks are really close, and a light down at the very bottom where the marks can be a little bit further apart. Another way that you can achieve value is by the pressure that you're applying to the media that you're using. So for example, with pencil or charcoal, the harder you press, the darker the value. Right? Commonly, we think about value when we are painting, right? And value is actually one of the key attributes of color, right? As to whether it's light or dark. And we talk about tints, right? When we're adding white paint to a color, and shades when we are adding black. Right? And so in a variety of different media, we need to understand that there is a scale of or a range of values that we want to be taking a look at. So in this example here, we can see when we put colors up against a gray scale that the colors also are going to change. So if I start with number 5 as my base color, or if you've seen the color video, our main hue, when we start adding a little bit of white, right, we're changing the tint of that color and making it lighter. And likewise, if I'm starting with 5 here as my main hue and I start adding black, I'm making different shades of that color, right? And different colors are going to react differently to the whites and the blacks overall. Okay? So value, it works with black and white media, but it also works with color as well. Okay. So what I want you to start thinking about is the difference between a value scale, okay, or what is called like a stepped scale, where we can see the distinct changes from one value to the next. right? And this is illustrated in the top example, versus a continuous gradation, which gradually shifts from light to dark, right? And when we are looking at creating more realistic drawings, it is this continuous gradation that we are going to be looking for in order to create those smooth transitions. So we know a little bit about key lighting terms. We're understanding about tints and shades and that there's different ranges of values. Now, what does this mean when we start applying these concepts to the creation of different artworks? One of my favorite approaches to value is a Greek concept, or sorry, an Italian concept called chiaroscuro, which is basically a highly dramatic application of highlights and shadows. And what we end up seeing here are very sharp transitions between various tones, right? In terms of the white against the mid-tone against the black of the shadow, right? And in the Renaissance, during the 1500s or so, right, artists started to draw on a colored ground, right? In this case, so you can see Hans Holbein the Younger drawing on a kind of a sepia or a brownish paper in order to create his drawing. And what that does is it establishes the mid-tone, and then you can go in with white Conte or white ink or paint and black, and you can just use those two colors in order to really create sort of that full sense of value, but it's a high contrast of light and dark, right? The overall effect of this particular approach to value is that it creates very theatrical and mysterious looking artworks, right? And we can see that in an example such as Artemisia Gentileschi's The Beheading of Holofernes from 1620, right? The intensity of the light is absolutely superb in this particular piece, where we see all of the little wrinkles and folds in the satin bedding, right? The smoothness of the skin, but even this the quality of the lighting right in this area here, where we can see that the hilt of the sword being pressed into Holofernes' upper arm, right? But all of this bright area is highly contrasted by the intense shadow, and it's these stark colors, one up against each other, that really give this a tremendous amount of drama and overall excitement. Okay? So if we start taking a look at this in terms of our sense of value, you'll notice that with these chiaroscuro paintings is that a lot of the values tend to be on opposite ends of the gradation, right? So there's a lot of lights and there's a lot of darks, right? But there's not quite as much as there of the midtones as the other two, right? Now, if we start taking a look at another approach called sfumato, and this was developed in the Renaissance as well, and again, it's an Italian approach to painting. You may recognize this particular work, right? It's Mona Lisa by Leonardo da Vinci, right? It's characterized by very soft and transitions between tones, right? There's a smoky atmospheric effect, right? And the idea with this particular approach is that we end up actually seeing a little bit more of it's a realer or more accurate way in which the eye sees the world, right? We have a phenomenon called depth of field, in which part of what we see is actually in focus, and then stuff that's a little bit closer to us gets a little bit blurry, right? That's before the focal length of our eyes, and then stuff that's farther away, right, in the background, it also kind of blurs out. And this sfumato approach creates that atmospheric quality that replicates how the eye sees the world. But when we again start taking a look at the ranges of values, right, there's some darks, right, and there's some lights, but this particular approach dominates using the center of the value scale with a little bit from either extreme, right, because the artists are more concerned with blending and having smoother transitions, so it's a little bit more challenging to get those really, really dark darks and those really, really bright brights when you're worrying about making sure that they're able to float, all the values are able to flow together. Right? Our third approach to considering value is called diffuse lighting. And basically what this means is that we're working with a low contrast lighting scheme. So there isn't a whole lot of difference between the lights and the darks. It is dominated by lighter values. Okay, and there's a sense of evenness, or the image is kind of washed out overall. Right? And we can see this in a variety of different photography formats. In particular, you would notice this with documentary photography from the 1920s and 30s in the United States, where artists are using this not to create theater, but what they're using this style of lighting for is to say, hey, this is the truth. This is what I see. I'm not trying to hide anything. I'm not creating a theatrical moment. This just happens to be the way things are. So there's an element of, I'm going to say, truthfulness that people tend to assume when the lighting is fairly even and kind of washed out, because it's not about trying to elicit our emotions. It's more about just saying, here's the facts of what it is that I am seeing, right? And again, when we take a look at our value scale, right, a lot of the values tend to be down at this end here, down towards the white and the light grays, right? We get the odd little bit of a dark spot, maybe in the hair of the two figures, right, and the shadows, but the image is dominated by these lighter values. Okay, so we've seen three different examples. Now, artists are using these three different techniques in a variety of different ways. And one of the more interesting applications of these three techniques of value was explored by Claude Monet. He would work with the same subject matter over and over and over again, right? And this particular subject matter were haystacks, or also known as wheat stacks. And he painted these many, many times over his career. And he was very interested in the atmosphere and the timing of when he would go out on plein air, right? He'd take his easel and his paints out into the countryside, set up, and quickly try and create the impression of what he saw happening with the light. Right? So here we have a fairly diffuse lighting scheme, and in this particular painting, this is a morning shot, right? So imagine the sun's just coming up, right? The sun is just warming everything up. It's fairly even, right? We get a little bit of an intense shadow like our other example, but everything is kind of bathed in the same consistent kind of lighting. A second example of Monet's is a sunset that was painted during what Monet refers to as frosty weather, right? And here again, we're getting that kind of smoky effect of the sfumato. Same subject matter, but a different treatment of the value and the approach to thinking about how the colors need to be kind of blending together, and the range of values that are at play in this particular piece to recreate that kind of like atmospheric, natural, I'm going to say more naturalistic look. And then we get something that's a little bit more chiaroscuro. Granted, this is not as dramatic as Caravaggio's paintings, but you can see here that contrast is playing a much greater role. You can still see that the intensity of the sun is there in order to create the bright highlights. We have much more intense shadows, not just on the haystack, but also on the trees that line the background, as well as some of the architectural buildings that are off on the right-hand side. Okay? So in summary, what we've done is we've taken a look at value, right? And remembering that value is about understanding light, right? So we need to understand that there has to be a light source, and how we choose to use the range of values that are generated by that light source is going to help to create different interactions between the viewer and the subject that you are trying to depict. And those three different approaches are: number one, chiaroscuro, number two is sfumato, and number three is the diffuse lighting scheme. Well, hopefully you'll have an opportunity to practice some of these different techniques in the near future. If you have any questions, please make sure that you're asking, and as always, right, good luck. We'll see you soon. Okay, take care.